In Asia, China's leader Xi Jinping has secured an unprecedented third five-year term as president in a unanimous vote by Beijing's rubber stamp parliament. At the third plenary session of the National People's Congress, nearly 3,000 members voted for Mr. Xi. He was also confirmed as the head of the military, meaning he will hold three of the most powerful positions in the country. Han Zheng, a 68-year-old former Politburo Standing Committee member, was appointed vice president. The Congress has also passed a sweeping plan to reorganize the country's institutions.
You're right. The unanimous election of President Xi Jinping fully reflects the common aspiration of the whole party, the military, as well as people of all ethnic groups in the country. It fully embodies the will of the party, the will of the people, and the high degree of unity of the will of the country. This is of great significance to China's development and to comprehensively promoting the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation.
For more on this, we can speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, who joins us live from our studio in London. Karl, good to have you on Newsday. Thank you for joining us. Now, can you take us through what this means for President Xi Jinping as president and for the direction that China will be pursuing?
Well, you're right when you say that this is unprecedented. It's unprecedented because usually the president of China, a two-term presidency at the most constitutionally, 5 years each. That was a law in the Constitution until just a few years ago, 2018. That's when Xi Jinping, in his ability to maneuver the party Congress, to remove that term limit so that there are no term limits now on being president. So he's now, a third-term president going into a second decade of power. But to put things in also further perspective, this is largely a ceremonial role. The three power centers in China are the party, that is the Communist Party, the military, and finally the state. It was back in October when Xi Jinping was handed control and leadership of the Communist Party and of the military. So now he has a ceremonial title as president, basically consolidating his rule. He has no rivals, no successors. He's in good health. He could ostensibly even be, president for life. So the question becomes then, what does he do now that he's been able to consolidate his control?
And that is the next question. With China now being tagged one of the world's declining superpowers, what are the next moves we can expect to see from Xi, and what impact do you think they will have?
Well, you need to also just consider what's been going on, not only the past few years, but what's been happening this year as well. The past few years, of course, we've had COVID. China really has been ground zero for COVID. They're coming out of 3 years of what turned out to be zero COVID tolerance. You had zero COVID lockdowns through vast regions of China. You had mass quarantines. The economy took a hit. The economy only grew 3% last year. You're talking about the world's second largest economy. It's now projected to grow about maybe 5%. We had mass unrest because of these mass quarantines, which had never been seen before. You've got rising youth unemployment in the urban centers of China. That's why all eyes will be on the premier. The premier is Li Qiang. Li Qiang will be confirmed as premier tomorrow on Saturday. He will be responsible for not only the day-to-day running of the government, but how to run the world's second largest economy. So it's important to see just how much independence he'll be given to really try to bring China out of its recession. That remains to be seen. And then on Monday, we'll also hear from Xi Jinping himself about what his vision for his leadership of China is, but we're already getting some clues about just what he feels needs to happen and how, China is at odds with the rest, especially the U.S.
Speaking of the U.S., can you tell us how this will affect relations with the United States? And please feel free to go into detail.
Well, very simply, for example, he met with business leaders earlier this week, where he basically lashed out at the U.S., blaming it for its problems at home with its economy, saying that the U.S. In cahoots with the other Western countries is responsible for the suppression, containment, and encirclement of China and wants to keep China down. That's why they want to have more independence in its supply chain. For example, the U.S., Japan, and the Netherlands, they've put very strict limits on the kinds of goods and manufacturing items that can be sent to China to build semiconductor microchips out of fear they could be used by the military. They don't want to see that happen. That's why China wants to now boost its own semiconductor industry as well. So that's one thing we'll see. And then, of course, you have the balloon saga of the spy balloons sighted off of America for days on end in Montana and finally shot down over the Atlantic Ocean. Now, more saber rattling that China has this vast balloon spy network that's infiltrating airspace over the U.S. and other countries. And so that's only just worse intentions, but that's why people are hoping there will be some sort of a breakthrough summit between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden in the months ahead.
Now, of course, there's also tension in the Asian region as well. Let's look at some of the security dynamics and the relations. Now we look at North Korea ramping up what looks like an offensive preparation for what they're calling a real war. How do you think China is going to react to the several regional powers that are all getting ramped up for what looks likely to be some sort of military exchange?
This is a very important point that you're raising, because what needs to be kept in mind is this. When you look at China's, foreign relations with the West, you have to kind of avoid looking at things only in terms of how China relates with the U.S. What's of greater concern now is what we see happening in that region, especially between South Korea and Japan. They are historical enemies because of Japan's role in World War II. Now, for the first time, they're reaching a rapprochement where they're going to have an exchange of leaders meeting for summits in the coming weeks, for example, and they want to have closer ties because they see the greatest threat to their economic and security as well comes from China. So we're seeing greater cooperation from South Korea and Japan, for one. And then finally, of course, there's Taiwan. Xi Jinping has made it known that he wants his legacy to be defined by, retaking Taiwan by 2027. In fact, that's what the CIA chief, William Burns, says, that China, is laying out plans to maybe possibly invade Taiwan by 2027. But what's different, unlike Ukraine, where China has a strategic relationship with Russia, you've got a situation where you have 100 miles of water, and it's not going to be so easy to retake Taiwan if that's their stated aim, because President Biden has also said that the U.S. will get directly involved militarily, and that's not what you're seeing in Ukraine.
Well said, Karl. Now, you told us about how this might affect U.S. relations, but I'm just curious if you might have any insight on how this might affect relations with other countries apart from the United States.
Well, what's interesting is really relations with Europe, because, as you know, you've got leading Chinese companies such as the computer network manufacturer Huawei, which the U.S. wants to have other countries banning. They're responsible for installing, the wireless network in European countries, such as maybe Germany. Great Britain has recently banned them. U.S. wants European countries to ban the use of Huawei equipment because that could be used for surveillance purposes. So that's what we see, adding to the tensions right there. And of course, you've got, the region in the Pacific itself, where countries like the Philippines are very worried about, China taking control of islands near the Philippines, and Japan as well. And that's why you've got Japan and South Korea edging closer together. And then finally, Australia. They now want to build nuclear submarines as a counter threat against China.
Right, Karl Bostic, Arise Special Correspondent, thank you so much for that very detailed insight into all that is going on in China. Thank you for your time.